Hi, and welcome to the show where we share the stories of the many who intersect with our healthcare system but are rarely heard from. My name is Kevin Poe, founder and editor of Kevin MD. Today on the show, we have Shvetali Thatte. She is a pre-medical student and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Why Cultural Competency Courses Should Be Requisites for Medical School. Shvetali, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's so great to be here.
So we'll get into your article in a little bit, but first off, can you tell me your story and your journey to where you are today?
Of course. So I grew up near a suburban town in Chicago. And ever since I was little, I really enjoyed helping people. Whether it was in school, outside of school, I was much of a helper. And I also enjoyed talking to people. My parents always joke that I would sit at their dinner table with their adult friends. And I just like to listen in, sometimes chime in. I just really enjoyed people in general. So growing up, I always knew that whatever career I went into, I wanted it to be a career that would have a direct interaction with people, something where I could see tangible impact being made on people around me daily. And I grew up with a lot of variety in my life. I started out in looking at biochem. I also looked at computer science and English, law. I kind of had a whole variety of experience in those fields. But ultimately in high school, I took a lot of bio electives and I also did research in cancer biology. And those were the two driving points where I kind of fell in love with bio, especially after I took a elective in neuroscience. That's what really drove me into thinking about going into a career of medicine, because I definitely enjoyed bio and neuroscience a lot, and I could see the impact I could have daily. I also spent time volunteering at hospitals and shadowing doctors, which really solidified my decision of going into medicine, because I knew that this was a field that would let me use my science brain, combine it with my passion for people to give me the ultimate career. So my senior year, I applied to a lot of BSMD programs, and I ultimately committed to Case Western. Today, I'm a sophomore at Case Western Reserve University. I major in neuroscience and economics, and I'm part of their pre-professional scholars program in medicine, which means that after my 4 years of undergraduate years, I will be matriculating to the Case School of Medicine.
Fantastic, and best wishes on your medical journey. I'm a
Thank you.
BA MD graduate myself at Boston University, so it's a fun ride. So let's get into your KevMD article. Why cultural competency courses should be requisites for medical school. Now, for those who haven't read your article, can you walk my audience through it and share the story of why you decided to write it?
So beginning in March, I took some time and I read some books. The ones that stood out to me the most were Black Man in a White Coat and Unmasking Racism in Healthcare, Alive and Well. And both of these books really took me on a different path towards medicine. I always knew that medicine is very science-based. I always thought about doctors going in to see patients with basically the mindset of looking at their disease, diagnosing their symptoms, and then prescribing a treatment. But after reading these books, I realized that the sociocultural background of the patient is a big factor in determining how the patient's health comes about, and as well as how the patient will fare. And that sociocultural background is something that many physicians need to be taking into account when treating a patient, but it's also something that can easily be overlooked with the other nitty-gritty specifics of medicine itself as a science. So that's kind of how I started to think about culture in medicine. And after that, I spoke with some of my fellow pre-med fellows. I also talked to med students and physicians to hear their thoughts on how culture plays a role in medicine, as well as how they think cultural competency can work to eliminate or at least significantly reduce disparities such as race, class, gender, and language disparities that currently exist greatly in our healthcare system. And a common perspective that I found from med students and physicians was that in the years of med school, a lot of the information itself is very dense, it's overwhelming, and it's very specific. So in learning all of the medical terminology, physiology, anatomy, disease-specific information, it's difficult to take the time to also build a foundation of cultural competency and then build upon that cultural competency foundation to learn the cross-specifics of cross-cultural care. So after that conversation, I did some research with some of my friends. We actually wrote a formal literature review that looks at culture in medicine, the consequences of cultural negligence in medicine, the benefits of cultural competency, as well as current cultural competency training and the merits of cultural competency as a pre-med course. And this led us to believe that if students were given the opportunity to build their foundation in cultural competency at the pre-med years, that would help them to work upon those foundations in med school without being overwhelmed by that information as well. So my article itself is kind of a summary of the research that I compiled in my literature review. And it discusses how if students were offered the opportunity to take cultural competency courses at the pre-med levels, then they could take more time to self-reflect upon their internal biases, prejudices, as well as take the time to really delve deep into seeing how different cultural systems and cultural values play a role in health and the implications it has on our health as well as the health of others. So my article really talks about how the more time we can give students to self-reflect upon this, the better they will be when they become physicians themselves. And because the med school journey really begins in the pre-med years, the pre-med years are when you learn the foundations of chemistry, biology, all the courses that you will need foundations in to learn medical specific information during med school. I talk about how cultural competency is part of that journey and it needs to be integrated earlier on, especially at the pre-med years.
So what's the current status of cultural competency courses in medical school? What percentage of medical schools currently teach cultural competency?
So the Association of American Medical Colleges currently requires all medical schools in the United States to offer cultural competency curriculum as part of their 4 years of med school curriculum. But as of recent studies that have come through, most cultural competency curriculum only focuses on about 2 years. It's only there for about 2 years, and that's the first 2 years. So towards the latter years of medical school, that cultural competency training isn't really referred to as often as it should be. More so, the AAMC has a set of specific guidelines. They're called the TACCT standards. And these standards aren't really being met by each med school. Each med school might meet a couple of them, but not all of them. And so going off of that, a lot of the studies that have been done show that although there is cultural competency curriculum in each med school, it's not universalized, nor is it being adequate, nor is it adequately meeting the requirements of the AAMC itself.
Now you're asking for cultural competency courses into pre-medical years. Currently, is that even an option in the majority of colleges today?
So a lot of schools right now require pre-med students to take some kind of behavioral or social sciences course, but none of these are necessarily specific to looking at culture and its implications on health. So what we're asking for is for individual undergraduate institutions to begin offering a course that will look at different aspects of culture in relation to health. And it would be a course that would be offered to all pre-meds, all pre-health students too, if anyone wants to take it. And although no course like this necessarily exists at any university as a requirement, there are schools that have tried to implement these kind of courses in the past, and certain schools still offer these courses as electives right now, but because they're often at a 200 or 300 level and require some prerequisites because they're often very specific. So for one example, there's a course at my school that relates medical anthropology, society, and culture together. And that's definitely a course that we think comes close to what we are asking. But because it has 2 prerequisites, it's often not taken by many pre-med students. So what we're asking for is kind of a basic course that would be at the beginning.
We're talking to Shvetali Thatte. She's a pre-medical student, and she wrote the Kevin MD article, Why Cultural Competency Courses Should Be Requisites for Medical School. Now, can you tell me something that you've been passionate about or something that you've been curious about over the last few months?
So I think after I wrote that article and we also compiled our literature review, the next steps for me this summer that have really taken over my life have been starting a petition to make cultural competency a requisite for pre-meds. And that petition so far has garnered over 470 signatures. And we've also had the support of many healthcare physicians, professionals, as well as healthcare influencers on Twitter and Instagram. So we're hoping to keep furthering that support. We've also drafted proposals that we've submitted to the Association of American Medical Colleges. Right now, the Council on Admissions is reviewing that proposal, so we're hoping to hear back from them soon. And we've also submitted proposals to individual undergraduate institutions. So the friends that I wrote the literature review with, they go to 3 different universities. So we've submitted it to our 4 universities. And we've also had many of our supporters sign up to send a proposal to their individual undergraduate institutions. So right now we have over 20 institutions who we are in conversation with about discussing the logistics of implementing such a course. And we're hoping to continue expanding our initiative and just see where it can really go.
And for people interested in finding out more about your message, how can people do that?
So we have an Instagram account that's at cultural_competency. And we also have a link tree. So if you go to linktree.com/cultural competency, you can also find all of our information there, our literature review, both of our proposals, the link to our petition, as well as a Google form that you can sign up on to submit a proposal to your individual undergraduate institution.
And my final question, do you have a take-home message that you want to share with the Kevin MD audience?
I think after doing all of my research and writing that article, I really believe that perspectives are broadened over time. And the more time that we can give our physicians to explore and understand their cultural values, the cultural values of others, and the implications of culture on health, the better. Our nation is continuously diversifying. And by 2050, the US Census Bureau predicts that there's not going to be a single ethnic majority. So our physicians need to be prepared to provide the best cross-cultural care. And as data shows, current cultural competency training isn't enough in med school, and we aren't providing the best cross-cultural care that we could. So allowing students to recognize the importance of culture early on and apply those foundations to cross-cultural specific care in med school and beyond, the data stands with us on this, that studies done by UCLA and Vanderbilt University show how students who take cultural competency during their undergrad have an enhanced ability to understand how issues are determinants of health, how other structural stigmas, health economics, race can all play a role in treating patients. So I really believe that understanding cultural competence at the pre-med level can have a great influence on the way our physicians will care for patients, especially as we go into a future with an ever-diversifying nation. And I just kind of hope that all of the listeners out there, if they believe in our mission, they'll go to our website, they'll sign our petition, and they'll really urge the AAMC, any undergrad institutions that they're affiliated with, to start offering cultural competency for pre-meds.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story and your insight. And thanks again for being on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me.